Not anymore. It used to bother me a lot more years ago because my ego was still very much involved, and my pride. I'm a human. I have an ego and I have pride, and there were times years ago when I'd get irritated when I'd hear people almost forget that the NWO is what kind of launched that anarchy type theme, because that's really what it was. And I do think that Vince McMahon turning heel a year after I did, by the way, and kind of going from the stuffed suit announcer that nobody really associated as being the owner of the company, and then all of a sudden he's showing up in a black jean jacket and he's the evil boss a year after I did it. It was kind of it used to irritate me, but here's what I've learned over the years. Number one, it doesn't matter, so why get upset about it, because it's not going to change anything, first of all. But secondly, if you really break down any story, and you can go back in time, and I won't bore your listeners with too much detail here because I can go off into the weeds on this, but I'm reading a book now called The 7 Basic Plots, actually is the title of the book, I believe. I think it's written by a guy by the name of Christopher Boone. I'm not sure. I'll have to look. And in essence, there are really 7 basic storyline plots. And it goes back hundreds and thousands of years across different civilizations and different cultures before there was any form of, communication outside of a tribe or a region. The human experience and this human psychology tends to create stories that are very familiar in the human psyche. So again, not to go too deep on you, but when you look at, a movie like Jaws and you realize that that's kind of a story that was told thousands of years ago, and you look at, you can Google just about any current film and you can find the roots of that story in something that was hot 15, 20, 25 years ago. So now that I look at story and I kind of look at the evolution of storytelling from a little different perspective, it doesn't bother me at all. If anything, it's flattering. If I feel anything at all when people talk about stuff like that, I know where a lot of this stuff came from, at least within wrestling. I know what started it. And by the way, the Four Horsemen are around before the NWO. Now the story was different. The perspective or the point of view of the Four Horsemen was clearly much different than the perspective and the point of view of the NWO, but it was still, a group of badass guys, getting together and taking over. So it could be argued that the NWO is a derivative of the Four Horsemen, and there'd probably be some truth to that.
That's a good point, and it's funny, like with the heel McMahon, for instance, obviously, there was heel Eric Bischoff first, and that was another thing that I feel like was lifted a bit. And then I feel like people that are ECW fans, they lift the idea that the Attitude Era was spawned by us. Well, the Attitude Era was really spawned by the NWO, Hall, Nash, and Hogan turning heel. Did that ever bother you to a point where it's like, wow, why are they giving these guys so much credit when it was us, that beat Vince McMahon for 2 straight years?
Well, it's kind of apples, oranges, and bricks. It's apples and oranges are 2 edible fruit species. So I guess it's easy to understand why people could kind of confuse or distort the relationship between the NWO and the Attitude Era, for example. I personally don't. And, Sean, who I'll be with you, April 22nd, we've talked about this on our podcast. One of the reasons, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, but one of the reasons why the DX in the Attitude Era was as successful as it was because of Sean Waltman. Because Sean Waltman gave it credibility. Sean Waltman, just like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were the 2 guys that came over and kind of turned WCW upside down, Sean Waltman was the guy that left the NWO and went over to WWE, and they came back and turned WCW upside down. So I think Sean Weltman probably deserves a lot more credit in the overall success of the Attitude Era and the NWO than people really give him credit for. But ECW, going back to that, I never watched ECW. First of all, it was only available on a very limited kind of scale. And it just wasn't my cup of tea anyway. And I think one thing that, Paul Heyman did a lot of amazing things, and I'm friends with a lot of guys that were right there at the epicenter of it. Bubba Dudley's a good friend of mine, and we stay in touch and we talk. We've talked a lot over the years. We've worked together. We've worked in creative together. We've worked in the ring together. We've sat in a room full of dozens of people and listened to them babble about what they thought they knew about storytelling and wrestling, and we both look at each other and just roll our eyes. But Bubba will be the first one to tell me, how innovative Paul Heyman was, and I recognize that. But there was a difference between the Paul Heyman style of innovation and some of the crazy stuff that Paul did, which was really out of the box in terms of way of presenting wrestling at that time. Paul innovated a lot of crazy stuff, but there was nothing but Paul did that was anywhere, in my opinion, remotely close to, again, the storytelling perspective and the arc of the NWO. Nothing.